In 2020, the Conference Board of Canada wrote, quote, "The pronounced decrease in Canada's elderly poverty rate has largely been attributed to the implementation of the Canada Pension Plan and Quebec Pension Plan in 1966. Pensions as a proportion of disposable income among Canada's elderly more than doubled between 1980 and 1996, from 21 to 46%. The first cohort to receive full public pensions turned 65 in 1976. The generation that followed became the first beneficiaries of private occupational pensions that were expanded between the 1950s and the 1970s. So what we see here is the impact of economic and social policy. The baby boomer generation, those born after World War II, roughly between 1946 and 1964, are currently between 56 and 74 years old. As a generation, the boomers have experienced numerous structural changes that have benefited their experience of aging. They've benefited from Canada's old age pension, which began in 1952, the Canadian Pension Plan from 1966, the Guaranteed Income Supplement payments beginning in 1967, and this generation was the first to have antibiotics and immunizations as children. They were also the first adults to access legal oral contraception, and they received universal healthcare coverage between 1946 and 1961. Canadian sociologist John Miles has compared the aging experiences of people who were elderly in the 1950s versus today. He writes that they had fundamentally different life experiences that structured their opportunities and their perceptions of aging. Quote, "The elderly cohorts of the 1950s were poor because they had poor lives. Born at the close of the 19th century, their youth was marred by World War I, and their working years straddled the Great Depression and World War II. They were poor not only because retirement plans were ungenerous and private plans underdeveloped, but also because they were unlucky generations. By comparison, today's retirees are relatively affluent, mainly because they had good lives. They are the children of high industrialism. Their early careers straddled the booming post-war decades. They generally enjoyed job security and rising real wages over most of their lives, and as a result, accumulated substantial savings and resources, not just Canada Pension Plan benefits. Compared to their parents, today's retirees, these children of high industrialism had, quote, good lives." So Miles is essentially saying what it means to be old differs depending on when and where you are living and what experiences you have had as a generation marked by pivotal collective events. So think about what it means to age today. What do you see in commercials, on television? Here are some examples. So on Netflix, we have more media geared toward older generations. Here you might have seen the show Grace and Frankie, with the very famous actors Lily Tomlin on the left and Jane Fonda on the right. And the show features them creating new lives for themselves after their marriages end. Here we see Meryl Streep and Alec Baldwin, shown at the end of a sex scene in the movie It's Complicated. And there has even been the creation of an entire magazine called Zoomer Magazine. So what is a Zoomer? A Zoomer is, quote, a boomer with zip, people age 45 plus who enjoy life to the fullest. The world's largest and most affluent generation, the 45 plus. Open a newspaper, turn on a television, read a blog, it's likely you'll find yet another story about the enormous power and influence of the 45 plus population, the people who are literally reinventing aging. These are quotes from Zoomer Media Limited back in 2016. And let's look at the articles shown on the cover of this magazine. Stronger, longer. Find cancer faster, walk your way to lasting brain health, easy diet at fitness hacks, more money, hair today, better with age. Explore Asia from the ancient to the emerging. What dominant narratives about aging are being communicated on this magazine? If we go back to the 1950s and compare the dominant narratives of aging, what are today's dominant narratives? Existing text analyses indicate that dominant media emphasize the importance of an active lifestyle, the value of new experiences and freedom, particularly through travel, maintaining youthfulness, an indication that elders today have a bit more agency with regard to finances. Now, on the one hand, this could be from generational wealth, or this could be from state-structured programs like pension plans that were not yet implemented for people that were old in the 1950s. There's also an emphasis on medical interventions and constant self-regulation to fight anticipated decline. What examples of dominant aging narratives can you find? You might find them from different places around the world, as the ones I've presented here are largely North American. So what we see through this example is that age itself is culturally and structurally created. To be 55 in 1950 is a different thing than being 55 in 2020. And this brings us back to Mannheim's generation location. The idea that generation location shapes the structural conditions we will likely encounter, and therefore how we think about the world. In this case, how we think about aging and how we organize our lives, what we believe is possible. But let's think critically about this idea of the Zoomer generation. Who is this idealized model of aging accessible to? There's certainly class differences between today's elders. The Zoomer lifestyle costs a lot of money to pay for new experiences and health maintenance and so on. This access is also racialized. Here we can see Canada's average life expectancy broken down by male and female. The blue striped line is the average life expectancy for the total population of Canada. For all men in Canada, this is 79 on average, and for all women in Canada, it is 83 on average. However, if we break this down by Indigenous status, so First Nations is the dark blue, Métis is the turquoise, and Inuit is the white, we can see that Indigenous populations have a lower life expectancy. What factors can we tie this to? To explain these differences, we would have to consider systemic racism, discrimination, intergenerational trauma, access to resources, and colonialism. We can also think about urban and rural differences. So Métis Indigenous people are descendants of unions between Indigenous and European people, and they are more likely to live off-reserve in urban centers, whereas First Nations and Inuit are likely to live more remotely. So to conclude, we can ask about the utility of the concept of generation. While it unites groups of people who are born at a similar time period and experience similar structural conditions, the analytical category of generation can also conceal differences and inequalities between members of the same generation. Is Zoomer an elitist media construct designed to make money from the wealthiest elders, yet a lifestyle that is not accessible to the masses? Or is it a concrete outcome of changing economic conditions, healthcare access, and a growing social safety net? A key takeaway point here is that conceptions of age and aging not only shift with generation, but that these generational experiences intersect with race, ethnicity, immigration, colonialism, gender, class, ability, and so on. In this short mini lecture, we have gone deeper into the sociological imagination to consider Mill's argument that individual biographies intersect with societal history. As this lecture ends, consider how your own individual biography is intersecting with the time period you were born in. What generation are you part of, and what are the unique structural conditions that you face?